The hardest thing as a junior driver was, and frankly, it still is now, attaining a super license, right? You hear it all the time now that like there's super license points and this and that, and there's a whole structure of how you gain enough points to be granted a super license. The F2 category at the time granted super licenses to the top three drivers in the championship. So that year of F2, I was still a part of the Red Bull junior team program. And obviously there was ambitions to try race in Formula One for Red Bull. And I was doing a lot of kind of F1 demonstrations and doing some straight line testing and simulator work behind the scenes and, doing everything that you need to do to almost embed yourself into the team. But then during that season, it became pretty clear that it's kind of a roadblock with Red Bull. They had just signed, they just promoted Vettel up into the primary Red Bull car. They have Mark Webber on a long-term deal. And then I believe they had like Buemi and I don't even remember who else they had in 2009, but there was kind of like everyone had multiple year deals. I'm like, well, where do I go? If I, in the end, Red Bull, as people I'm sure can understand from any interview that you read or listen to with Dr. Helmut Marko, but it's a very straightforward man. And he told me pretty much every step along the way in my junior career, if you don't win the championship, you're fired.
Wow.
And it was pretty much
No pressure.
yeah, but it's survive and advance.
Yep.
It's business. End of the day, they're trying to breed Formula One world champions. And frankly, if you don't win, are you a world championship caliber driver, right? And so he only said that to me one other time in my Red Bull journey, and it was my first year in Red Bull. And thankfully, I won the championship, so I didn't have to know if it was a bluff or not. But then fast forward to 2009, and Helmut Marko told me at the start of the season, you have to win this championship if you want a future in Red Bull. And, I feel like through a bit of misfortune, I had a lot of mechanical retirements, just reliability issues and whatnot. But I had 7 mechanical DNFs from 14 races. And then I had, I think, 6 podiums from the rest. But we finished second in the championship, didn't win the championship. And, the weeks later, I'm like, well, I guess we'll see what Helmut thinks. And I was like lobbying my counter argument to why I believe I should stay. And ultimately, he stayed true to his word, and I was released from Red Bull because I didn't win the championship, and I was then off on my own. And at the time, I thought my world was over, right? That was my golden ticket to Formula One because I didn't have any funding. I didn't have anything else. But what Red Bull gave me the opportunity to do was to create a name for myself and to create, a brand. I showed through various years of racing with Red Bull that I was a very accountable, reliable, and successful driver. So during that off season of 2009, although I thought my world was over and I was going to have to go back to school and get like a full-time, job with like everyone else, and suddenly, I was getting opportunities, and I was able to join the GP3 series, which was a category that is now Formula 3. And it was my first year not in the Red Bull junior team. And unfortunately, it was another second place finish in that championship. But again, it just showed that, I was becoming this like well-rounded driver where, I wasn't this hot or cold guy. I wasn't, the fastest guy on day one, but then crash on day 2 or whatever. Like I was just steady and constantly getting results and trying to elevate the teams that I was racing with to higher levels. And I think that's kind of what got me kind of each opportunity along the way, because at that point, I had a super license in my pocket from finishing second in the Formula 2 championship. And then you're just trying to integrate into a Formula 1 team in any capacity. And I had the option and the opportunity to be the reserve driver for Marisha Virgin Racing in 2011, as well as race in the Formula Renault 3.5 category. And that was a great championship for young drivers because you could be a reserve driver for an F1 team because the races were opposite weekends to Formula 1. Where the current F2 driver pool, you can be a reserve, but when you're participating in the race yourself in F2, you're not fully embedded into the F1 team. You might be there for each on-track session, but you're not really in the debriefs. You're not doing the media stuff. Like you're not the full kind of reserve driver that you could be, like for us when we were doing Formula Renault 3.5. And, it was a great championship while it existed. Like I went through there, Alex and Rossi went through there, Daniel Ricciardo, Brendan Hartley, Jules Bianchi, Sam Bird. You know, the list can go on and on of all these great drivers that had Formula One obligations, but you could still then race full time. But then when you're at the Formula One Grand Prix, you were fully embedded into the team, doing all the media work, doing all the drivers briefings, and just really learning how an F1 event really takes place. And that was it was a great opportunity, but it was also a championship I knew I had to win, and thankfully we did. And it came down to the last race with myself and Jean-Eric Vergne, who is now a multiple-time Formula E world champion. And it came down to the last race in Barcelona, and whoever beat each other would win the championship. And thankfully I came out on top. And from there, I got a F1 test with Renault as a gift for winning the championship. So at the F1 Young Driver test, I tested with Marussia Virgin Racing and with Renault, which was, I think, known as Lotus at the time, the black and gold one. And and it was just another situation of just having to prove myself to get to the next step. And we had a great test with both manufacturers. And ironically, there was no race seat available for me, although there was reserve driver opportunities. Toto Wolff from Mercedes, who at the time was a shareholder of Williams, was a shareholder of the Mercedes DTM team known as HWA. And he asked me if I would be interested in testing for him in DTM. And I was like, yeah, I'm a huge fan. Like, I would always watch, frankly, the whole off season in Canada. Like, I don't know if you remember, but like on Speed TV, they would just air like every DTM race and every like British touring car race or whatever. And so I was always watching, and I loved the racing in DTM. The cars were so cool. And so I would have been stupid not to say yes to that test. And I did the test. It went great. And then from that, I was offered a multi-year agreement to race for Mercedes and DTM. And it was kind of a crossroads in my career because my goals were always at Formula One. And frankly, signing that Mercedes DTM contract was kind of, in a way, giving up on F1, and my goal was always Formula One, but I think the bigger long-term goal was to be a professional racing driver, right? And when a brand like Mercedes-Benz approaches you, and you can sit at a table,
approaches you, yeah.
I mean, at the time, it was Norbert Haag was the president of Mercedes Motorsport, and he sat down in a boardroom with Toto and Norbert Haag, and like they presented me this contract where I was making a salary on a multiple-year thing, and I was like, "This is the dream. This is exactly what I want." And then I would have, if I didn't have a legal help on my side, I would have signed it then and there and and went home a happy man. But it was just an amazing opportunity, and frankly, it was worth it for like a decade of grinding it out, not knowing what each year held, right? And even when I was racing in Formula Renault 3.5 and all those junior categories, like I never had the luxury of having a 2-year plan where I could learn year one and then like go for the championship year two. Like every year I had to make the most of it to try to create the next year, right? I never had this like path that a lot of other kids did, but it honestly made me a better driver because once I made it to a professional level, I was ready for the pressure because I had been dealing with it my whole childhood, from early karting straight up to my first year of Form BMW, and then each year of cars along the way. I always had to prove myself to get myself another chance in another year. So I felt a lot more prepared and ready for the pressures of being a professional racing driver, and then I think a lot of other drivers did.